Hello everyone, this is Alex with Chicago Detours. Good morning to all of you who are joining me, and I hope you're having an excellent one. A little bit chilly here in Chicago. I'm a little more bundled up than the last couple of times I've done a live streaming event like this one, but it's good reason for me to be out and about this morning checking out the historic cityscape of Chicago, because we are a day away from a historic anniversary here in the city of Chicago, especially here on the north side where I am standing right now. It was 91 years ago tomorrow that the historic St. Valentine's Day Massacre occurred here in Lincoln Park on the city's north side. This obviously is one of the most infamous events in Chicago's history, and it's one that we can still walk out. We can still retrace the historic the historic landscape where this infamous crime occurred. There's missing elements, but there's also some tangible clues to that infamous day here that we can check out together. So I figured it was worth bundling up and heading out in order to experience that and show it off to all of you. And I think honestly, the cold today, the cold and the snow, might make it even more atmospheric. So what we are going to do is retrace the events of February 14th, 1929, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, so that we can get a sense of where it happened, how it happened, and why it happened, and why there's so little left to memorialize this event in Chicago's history, one of the most famous events that's ever happened in this town. So let me give you a little bit of background before we dive in too far. The St. Valentine's Massacre was the culmination of several years of gangland violence in Chicago. There had been a long-running feud between two major criminal syndicates in the city of Chicago. There was the North Side Irish gang, whose home base was in roughly this area here, and there was the Chicago Outfit, as they came to be known, and a primarily Italian gang that was based on the west and south sides of the city. Famously, by 1929, the South Side Italians were run by Mr. Alphonse Capone, perhaps the most famous name in Chicago's history. Not necessarily one that the city loves to toot, but somebody who is deeply remembered in American popular culture. There was a movie about Capone just made last year, and I think part of the reason he is so well remembered is because of this famous case, which everyone presumes Capone was the ultimate commander for. So what happens is there's been some tit-for-tat violence between the Italian gang and the Irish gang going on from the mid to late 20s. And Capone is looking out to wipe out his rivals once and for all. He's managed to knock off several previous leaders of the North Side Irish gang, assassinating people like Dean O'Banion and Jaime Weiss. And now he is going to take his shot at one of the last remaining leaders of the North Side Irish, a guy named Bugs Moran. So they set a trap for Bugs Moran right here in Lincoln Park, the home base of the North Side Irish, in an attempt to get rid of their rivals once and for all and to take over the illicit booze trade here in the city of Chicago. So let me give you a sense of where all of this is happening. I'm going to turn around my camera here. You got a view of my glove for a second there. Turning around my camera, this building right here, I'm at the corner of Dickens and Lincoln Park West, just so you have that as a frame of reference. We're a block away from the Lincoln Park Zoo, actually. You can see the zoo is in that patch of trees just over there. This is today one of the nicest districts in Chicago. High rent, high end, and it certainly did have some of that reputation back in the 1920s as well. I mean, just take a look at this very nice luxury hotel and apartment building. This is where Bugs Moran had one of his residences. Obviously, gangsters would need to move around a fair amount, but this was one of Moran's headquarters, and so this is where Capone lays his trap. Capone allows a shipment of whiskey to get stolen and wind up in the hands of the North Side Irish. The assumption is that Moran will go check out the whiskey that's been stolen so it can be distributed to the clubs and to the shops that he has taken control of here on the north side. So, once the trap is laid, the action starts to unfold. So we'll begin with Moran himself. Like I said, Moran is living in this building, and they have an appointment at 10:30 to walk a block away to the SMC Cartage Company, a garage located on North Clark Street that's operated by the Moran gang. So Moran is actually a little behind schedule. he heads out the front door of the building here, and we'll follow along with him. So today this building is known as the Pierre. You can see the awning that's over the entrance. That's where Moran would have exited the building back in 1929. Moran and an associate turn, and they start walking down Dickens Street right here. Just a short block over to Clark Street, one of the main thoroughfares on the north side connecting Lincoln Park and Lakeview with downtown. And happily for us, a lot of this old cityscape is still here for us to see. There's been a remarkable amount of this neighborhood still in its original shape, still tangible for us to check out. So Moran and his associate walk over here, and their destination is about a half block that way. They would have been heading towards a garage on the west side of Clark Street, just a half block up here. But as they're crossing the street, they notice something that gives them pause. They manage to spot off in the distance a Chicago police car. And so that is something that makes them think something is up. The Chicago police shouldn't be messing with their business. They know what's up. They've paid off the right people. This is 1920 Chicago. So they decide not to press their luck too much. Moran and his associate, both were dressed to the nine, like gangsters at that period, would have walked past this fine apartment building, the Pelham, looking lovely. They walked right down over here. They wanted to just make sure that things seemed off. They get to the alleyway here. They look down the alley right about where you see those garbage cans lined up against the fence. They would have looked down in that direction. That's the back entrance to the garage that they were going to be heading towards. And something seems off. Something is wrong. Moran and his associate decide we're not going to take the risk. And I'm sure fellas like this would have had a sixth sense for when the when danger was lurking. So they turn around and they retrace their steps. They go right back the way that we just came. I believe the common story is that Moran and his associate didn't go right back to his apartment because they knew that something was up, and if they returned, perhaps there was a trap waiting for them there. So they return supposedly to a coffee shop just to blend in, just to make sure that they can be part of a crowd and not catch any attention. And if you made me guess, it's hard to know, but if you made me guess, I'm guessing they walked into this coffee shop right here, Mellows, which is today Euro's fast food, one of the classic little diners here on Clark Street on the north side. So Moran ducks in here, waits to see what the next couple of minutes will bring, but the die has already been cast because all of the gangsters, like I just mentioned, are dressed to the nines. They're always dressed up. And Moran happens to dress very similarly, have the same build, have the same physique as one of his associates. One of the gangsters who had arrived a couple of minutes early at the auto garage is a dead ringer for Bugs Moran. And that sets the action in motion, even though Moran is getting himself out of danger. Because right across the street here, right across the street, you see that red brick building with the beautiful cornice in blue up on top, where the Chicago Pizza and Oven Grinder Company is located. You got that correct, Susan. Right across the street from the Chicago Pizza and Oven Grinder. That little building had a boarding house back in the 1920s. The upper floors were rented out by a couple of old ladies, and the renters, who had just rented space a week or two before, happened to be lookouts for the Capone organization. They had their eyes peeled for the particular build, the physique, the clothing of Bugs Moran. And they see somebody not walking across Clark Street down there, but instead coming from the opposite direction, coming from further north. They see somebody get out of a vehicle and walk into the auto garage who looks like Bugs Moran. So they send the signal. They say, our man is here. He's walked into the trap. Now is the time to make our boss happy. And we don't know exactly who these guys were, of course. We don't know exactly how they sent the signal. I actually was walking around a little bit earlier just to kind of get the lay of the land. I suspect they may have signaled down the alleyway here, perhaps. It's a very interesting space that I was exploring before I turned on the live stream here. But the signal is sent, and what happens is that the police car, which Moran had seen further down the block, springs into gear. A vehicle labeled Chicago PD drives down the block and pulls up in front of, I believe the address is 2124 North Clark Street, right about here. Two men dressed as Chicago police officers get out of the car. We'll pretend this Honda is a Chicago police vehicle. Obviously it's not, but it's roughly the right spot. They get out of the car along with two other men, not dressed as cops, but dressed in street clothes, I guess you'd say. And all of them walk into the auto garage that stood at this spot. There's nothing left of it today. But this is the spot where the SMC Cartage Company stood back in 1929. Those four men walk in the door, guns drawn, and commit one of the most infamous crimes in Chicago's history. They line up 7 members of the North Side Irish Gang, 5 people who were gang members, full-blown gang members, as well as 2 associates of the gang. They line them up against the north wall of the building, roughly where that tree is standing right now. And the 2 guys in plain clothing, they fire their Thompson submachine guns, their Tommy guns, just spraying the wall with bullets, killing 6 of the men immediately. The 2 dressed as police officers then use their shotguns, basically obliterating 2 of the people who were there in the garage. Perhaps they were people who still looked alive. Perhaps it also was part of a ruse, because immediately after the gunfire, all of the Chicago police officers, the guys dressed as cops at least, we don't think they were actually cops, they marched the other 2 gunmen out of the garage at the end of the shotguns, making it look like there was a crime and they're arresting them. They get back in their vehicle right here. Oh, hey, look, there's Chicago Crime Tour, checking out the spot where we are. But they march them back out the door here, load them into their car, and drive off into infamy. Obviously, this is a horrific crime, instantly infamous. Police respond within a couple of moments. Moran and the other people who are around, they hightail it out of there just as soon as they can, go to ground and make sure that they're safe. The Chicago police investigate this, the FBI investigates this, and as famous as this story is, it's actually never been resolved. Nobody was ever officially prosecuted. Nobody was ever put on trial for this crime. It's officially unsolved, but it definitely had an enormous impact on the city of Chicago. Because up until this time, Capone had been a very popular gangster. He had presented himself as somebody who was robbing from the rich to give to the poor, a Robin Hood-esque figure, just giving the people what they wanted. He would give interviews to the press. He was basically a Chicago celebrity. Not that people didn't know that he was dangerous, not that people didn't know his business was bloody, but they were willing to accept it during Prohibition, during the 1920s. But this changes things. This massacre it's just a bridge too far. And pretty quickly, the public and the press turn on Capone and turn this into really one of the big turning points in Chicago's gangland history. After 1929, Capone is no longer popular. He's declared public enemy number 1 in the press the following year. And in 1931, only 2 years after the massacre, he is finally convicted by the federal government on tax evasion charges and then gets sent to prison, winds up dying a decade later from syphilis. So he's never officially tied to this, but it would be hard to argue that this was not the beginning of the end for Al Capone, just a bridge too far, something too bloody and too dangerous, even for 1920 Chicago. Now, that brings us back to the site itself. Turning back to this empty lot here, the old SMC Cartage garage stood here for another 40 years or so. It was had been a front for the Moran gang, but they obviously didn't want to use the site very much longer. And so the garage just kind of sat around being used by businesses. I believe there was an antique shop here at one point. But mostly it was a tourist attraction. People came to just gawk at the site where this bloody event had happened. And eventually, well, it gets torn down, like so much else in the city. It meets its demise back in the 1960s. And I see Jamie commenting on this. You're right. Part of the wall where the massacre happened, like I said, roughly where that tree is, I actually love the mound of snow that's right here. Almost looks like a burial mound, doesn't it? I thought that very evocative as I walked up to the site this morning. But the building is torn down in the 1960s. The bricks where the massacre happened are initially bought by a businessman who uses them as a display behind a urinal at his bar, I think up in Vancouver, if I'm remembering correctly. And then eventually they're acquired by the Mob Museum in Las Vegas, and I think there's actually some at the Gerald Ford Presidential Library in Grand Rapids, Michigan as well. Not sure exactly why the Gerald Ford Museum has them, but there we go. So the garage is long gone, and like I was showing you, the site itself, which we have to assume was full of other, historic buildings back in the 1920s, just like that cityscape we walked through a couple of moments ago, it was replaced in the 1960s by a retirement home built by the city of Chicago. This is Chicago Housing Authority facility here. It's 50 years old at this point, and the site where the massacre happened is just a little field and a parking lot connected to the old folks' home. There's no sign, there's no monument, there's no plaque, there's nothing to signify that anything ever happened here. And I always find that really interesting. To me, that says something about Chicago's priorities, or at least the city's priorities. Like I had said, this is one of the most infamous events in Chicago's history. It's something that has been shown in popular culture again and again and again. It's one of those things, as a tour guide, I would get questions about all the time. Where's Capone? Where are the sites? Where did the massacre happen? Those sorts of things. And this is all that's here. It's just an empty lot with no memorialization at all. And I think that's on purpose. If you ask me, the reason that there's no plaque, there's no monument, that this isn't a landmark, is because the city of Chicago doesn't want us to remember this sort of stuff. You got to remember when all of this happened, Chicago's reputation was starting to change. This was not at all the image the city wanted to present to the world. We had been the city of the century back in the 1800s. We had hosted the World's Fair only 30-something years prior to this event. We really looked like we were going to be an alpha world city based on our incredible growth and the feats of engineering, architecture, whatever that we were capable of. And then all of a sudden, we get civic corruption. We get gangland violence. We get the Depression. We get a city that is no longer shining. We get a city with a increasingly nasty reputation, and one that honestly gets a little bit worse in the intervening decades. So by the time you get to the 1990s, when things like that gangland bus tour that drove past us a couple of minutes ago are becoming more and more popular, the city of Chicago has no interest in presenting itself as a home of gangsters any longer. It doesn't want to be seen as, the bad history that I see Leah talking about in the comments right there. It wants to be seen as a global city, a 21st century city, a city full of, beautiful architecture and good historical memories. The Valentine's Day Massacre doesn't line up with that. The legend of Capone doesn't line up with that. And so that's why, this city disappears him from the historical memory, doesn't landmark him, doesn't memorialize him, just tries to get us to forget him. Obviously, he's not forgotten. I'm out here. I'm out here 91 years later, and it's cold, but I'm out here. But you would never know if you didn't know, right? And I think that's a really interesting part of the city of Chicago's history. So, all of that being said, I hope you all enjoyed our little walk around the landscape of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre this morning. We like doing fun stuff like this. You can find us on Facebook Live, 10:30 a.m. Wednesday and Saturday mornings. Sometimes we do live events walking around like this. Other times we're hosting live Zoom events in that way. We also have special events, paid events coming up pretty frequently. Next Friday, I will be hosting the first installment of our Chicago Architecture Crash Course Seminar Series. That is going to be covering the first couple of decades of Chicago's architectural history, and I'm deeply excited to dive into that. In March, we're going to be hosting a series of virtual events about women's history. It's the Badass Women of History virtual events. Just got a sneak preview of that from my coworkers earlier this week, and it was fantastic. So I really hope you're able to to check that out at some point soon. And yeah, feel free. You can obviously subscribe and like on YouTube to catch all of these. If you're not on Facebook at 10:30 a.m., you can follow along with us on social media to make sure that you're getting all the latest updates from us. And I think that covers it as far as my end goes here. My fingers are starting to get a little cold, so I'll probably log off in a moment here. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you all had some fun and learned a lot. And if you're here in Chicago, stay nice and warm. Thanks, everyone.